Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am Tim Huxley, Executive Director of the International Institute for Strategic Studies Asia, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this morning's IISS Fullerton Lecture here in the Fullerton Hotel in the heart of Singapore's financial district. This is the 6th lecture in this year's series. It's excellent to see such a strong audience from the city-state's intellectual, government, business and media spheres with us this morning for this important event. We're delighted today to welcome President Felipe Calderón, President of Mexico, or the United Mexican States as his country is more properly known. He is the first head of state to deliver a Fullerton lecture, so this is indeed a momentous event. For 6 years, President Calderón has led a hugely important country with a rich history and culture, more than 200 years of sovereignty, a population of 115 million, and the world's 13th largest economy. The President assumed office on the 1st of December 2006 and is now coming towards the end of his term of office. Born in 1962, he has been engaged in politics and specifically the National Action Party, PAN, since he was a boy. During the presidency of his predecessor, Vicente Fox, Felipe Calderón served as director of the State-Owned Development Bank and later as Secretary of Energy. Felipe Calderón's presidency has been widely recognized for a series of reforms and initiatives that his government has implemented. Domestically, his government stabilized the price of the essential food tortilla, capped public servant salaries, and launched a program aimed at boosting employment opportunities. Remarkably, the Calderón administration has created almost 100 new universities and, as part of a universal healthcare system, more than 1,000 new hospitals, not to mention building many thousands of kilometers of new highways. And controversially, soon after becoming president, he deployed the armed forces in a campaign aimed at suppressing the drug cartels, which had generated widespread violence and insecurity. Mexico's foreign relations have traditionally been focused on the country's immediate region, and particularly on the United States. The country has increasingly become part of an integrated North American economy since joining NAFTA. However, under President Calderón, through the Mesoamerican Integration and Development Project, greater emphasis has been given to relations with other Latin American countries. Mexico's economic future depends on widening its international connections, and the President has argued strongly in favor of free trade, warning against the dangers posed by protectionism to global economic recovery. And it is this Mexican perspective on the global economy which provides the theme for the President's address this morning. Mr. President, we are greatly honored by your presence here this morning to deliver a lecture in the IISS Fullerton series, and we look forward eagerly to hearing you speak. The floor is now yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Tim Huxley, Executive Director of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, the professors, students, leaders, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Well, for me it's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank the members of this prestigious research center for this opportunity to participate and to share our visions, the Mexican vision of the global economy. And of course, if we have time to listen and try to answer some of your questions. Today, as long we are coming from APEC meeting in Vladivostok in Russia, I would like to share with you the Mexican perspective on the global economy. And I will divide my remarks in 3 parts. First, the global economic crisis. Second, the steps taken in the context of the G20 to face this situation. Let me remember that Mexico is heading the G20 since December last week. And third, the prospects for the future in our understanding. But the first, it is easy to forget that this is the world's global economic crisis in living memory. Actually, we remember this particular week that on September 2008, September 15 in 2008, 4 years ago, Lehman Brothers applied for Chapter 11 in the United States. And this crisis has had several stages. The first one, as we all remember, started exactly 1 month like this, 4 years ago, when the U.S. financial markets collapsed, creating a clear and present danger for the global economy. Mexico, as many other nations, this provoked one of the worst economic recession ever. Let me tell you that in 2009, our economy fell down 10% at annual rate by 2 quarters in a row, first and second quarter of 2009. And it was, by the way, we have elections after that. So once the financial market started to stabilize, the next stage of the crisis was marked by the responses of governments around the world. And those responses were different. As we were talking in the G20 meeting during several summits, a counter-cyclical policy was required. And many countries put in place counter-cyclical measures to protect their economies from the shock waves of the financial turmoil. And that was the case of Mexico as well. In my country, we implemented counter-cyclical measures to save jobs and to keep our industries afloat. In that sense, we created specific programs to save jobs in the export-oriented industries. For instance, we made the so-called technical stops in the manufacturer export-oriented industries. And in that sense, in front of the decisions of the enterprises to fight hundreds of thousands of workers, we proposed to the unions and the companies that if the worker accepts to receive 1/3 less of his salary, and the company accepts to pay 1/3 of the salary, the government accepted to pay the other 1/3 of the salary. And in that sense, we preserved at least 500,000 jobs in export-oriented industry in Mexico, at least by 6 months. That was the agreement. We increased government transfer to the poorest and established a temporary jobs program. In Mexico started a very important social program so-called Oportunidades, which is a conditioned transfer program. And it is conditioned because we are paying to the mothers a monthly transfer under the condition that they bring the kids to the school and the doctor, which is the structural way to break poverty in any country, in my opinion. And several countries are following the same program. For instance, Bolsa Familia in Brazil is exactly a transfer conditioned program, and other in Colombia and Guatemala and other countries. And at the same time, we increase the transfer through Oportunidades, and we started a program on temporary jobs. For instance, on archaeological sites in Mexico. We have thousands of archaeological sites undiscovered. And what we did is we started to pay a very small salary for unemployed people during 3 or 4 months in order to recover some of the small sites in archaeological interests, and so on. We also doubled government spending in infrastructure to create jobs in the short run and take advantage of our privileged geographical position. That was very important. We have suffered a lot of economic crisis in the 70s, 76, 82, 88, 94. But the difference today is it was the first economic crisis that it didn't started in Mexico itself, coming from abroad. That's one difference. And the second is it was the first economic crisis in which we were able to apply countercyclical measure, and in the other way around to the other crisis, we didn't reduce public expenditure in infrastructure. Actually, we increased public expenditure in infrastructure in the country. Actually, one of the key issues of my administration in order to gain competitiveness of the country was to establish a public-private program and a special long-term program in infrastructure, and we increased from 3% to 5% of GDP a year the expenditure in infrastructure. Of course, all these measures had a cost, and our public deficit reached levels of almost 4% of GDP during 2009. But we all know, and that is the difficult part of this, that the public deficit is like a one-shot gun. Once you fire it, you have to take measures to reload and, of course, stabilize public finances. And the big mistake of several economies during this crisis was that they forgot this little detail. You can use public deficit only once. But if you try to use public deficit on a regular basis, you will face sooner or later tremendous problem in terms of how to finance your own deficit. And that became impossible or almost impossible for several nations, and that is all about the economic crisis even today. So in that sense, you need a credible exit strategy to take the economy out of the deficit zone on time. And I remember I went to a G20 meeting. I cannot remember London or Toronto, probably Toronto. And the discussion of the leader was, well, we are starting to see a better outlook in economic terms, but the crisis is still there. We need to reinforce our economic stimulus. We need to keep the counter-cyclical measures in our economies. And we disagree on that because we supported the idea that an exit strategy was necessary. So finally, Mexico decided to implement an exit strategy in order to reduce the temporary deficit. And let me tell you that it was not, you could say that it was a rational option, but frankly speaking, and between us, it was not an option for Mexico. It was absolutely necessary. Why? Because we lost a lot of public revenues due to the crisis, but on top of that, we suffered in that year, 2008 towards 2009, an external shock in oil industry because our production of oil went down one year to another 200,000 barrels a day, and with a lot of huge losses for public finances. So we have no option. We needed to reduce public deficit, and we did it. And the exit strategy in Mexico were implemented by my government, included increasing tax revenues with high political costs, and we increased 1 point of VAT, and even we were proposing different tax to the Congress. Finally, it was not accepted. Reducing public expenditures, including closing very inefficient public companies. Let me tell you that there was a very inefficient public company, Lion Power, one of the oldest public companies in the country. We have a public system, the electricity system, which is in the arms of the state. But at that time, there were not only one, but two public companies, and one of them was absolutely inefficient. Actually, on top of tariffs to the public, we needed to apply almost $50 billion a year in subsidies to the company to finance its inefficiency. So we decided, after a very long story, I have no time to tell about it, but we closed the company in a very complex situation, but we successed on that, and that was very important for public finances. We promoted structural reforms, including trade liberalization. So in that sense, another tale of the G20 is always at any summit, all the countries used to say, we need to reject protectionism, and we agree and sign the public statement. And the day after, 15 out of 20 economies used to raise tariffs and barriers to the trade. We didn't. Actually, we reduced in the middle of the crisis from 11% on average our tariffs to 4%. And I'm talking the countries, we have 44 free trade agreements which provide free access to more than 1 billion of consumers around the world. But in all those countries without free trade agreement, we reduced tariff from 11 to 4%. An aggressive deregulation program. We tried to erase a lot of red tape for industry. Actually, I asked to the members of my cabinet, please give me a list of your more essential norms, laws, and regulations you need in order to operate daily. And the rest of that, if you cannot remember a law or regulation, we will erase that, and we will do, and we did it. And in that sense, we erased like 16,000 rules at federal level. And it was the most impressive effort in order to deregulate red tape in Mexico. Let me tell you that in order to open a company, before that you needed, for instance, you need to go to the Foreign Relations Secretary to ask permission to open a company. Then you needed to go to the Treasury Department in order to register as taxpayer. And then you needed to go to the Social Security Institute to register your workers. And then you need to go to the Commercial Trade Secretary in order to register your business. And it was taken like probably 3 or 4 months on average to open a new company at federal level. So we established a whole new process in order to open a company. Actually, we needed to interconnect the softwares between public agencies because one software was unable to talk with the other one. So in that sense, we established one single program, actually a web page, and in one office you are able today to open or to fulfill the federal requirements to open a company in only 2 hours. And with that we advanced a lot as well. So at the same time we increased investment in both infrastructure projects and technological educations to boost our competitiveness, and we invested a lot in people. As Mr. Director was saying, we have built in the last 6 years more than 1,000 new hospitals and clinics from greenfield in the country, and rebuilt another 2,000. And we have built 140 new universities in Mexico and built another 96 campuses or buildings in other existing universities. With that, for instance, in Mexico there are graduating more than 130,000 new engineers and technicians or every year, which means more engineers than in Germany or Canada or Brazil, which is almost the double of our population, and so on. And this strategy, of course, has paid off for Mexico. Today, Mexico's public finances are in order, and our fiscal deficit is below 1% of GDP. And even including the full investment of Pemex, the oil public company, which is out of the budget by law, our public deficit is the second lowest in the OECD countries today. We have an all-time record foreign reserves. We reached last week $161 billion in foreign reserve, plus 72 billion more that we have available for us on the IMF, due to a special agreement we have. Our economy has grown almost 16% in the last 3 years. So we have had an expansion of 16% after the economic crisis, which is not like Singaporean economy, but under the circumstances is a very good one for us. And that was the case of Mexico. But what is clear is a large number of countries around the world, a number of economies around the world did not have an exit strategy. And they kept the strategy of deficit, and they are paying a very high price on that. This reinforces uncertainty in the global markets, and this provoked a new crisis in the middle of the other crisis by the year 2010. This situation required policymakers to act quickly and boldly to recover confidence and growth. And that was a central part of the problem. Boldness and speed did not characterize the global response to the crisis, in particular in some leadership in the European Union. It was necessary to clearly distinguish between liquidity problems and real insolvency. If the problem is liquidity, you need cash. And if the problem is insolvency, you need debt restructuring. And what exactly the problem with some economies? For instance, if a country like Greece has a debt of almost 200% of its GDP, you are not talking about liquidity problems. Greece is not able to pay such amount of money. And every creditor should take its own responsibility in that problem. So in that sense, you need a full restructuring of that debt, and you need to allocate the cost of that among all the players in the problem. But countries like Italy or Spain have enough economic strength to honor their commitments. So we are talking not about a problem of insolvency, we are talking about the problem of liquidity. But if you don't act quickly, you could convert a liquidity problem in an insolvency problem. And that is exactly what started to happen last year. As long as Spain, for instance, or let me think that Italy could have a debt of more than 100% of its GDP, let me assume only 100%. And one day to another, the interest rate goes up like 1 point, you are talking that you should raise more tax revenues, 1 point of your GDP a year, in order to pay that small movement in the market. So probably Italy could support that situation like 2 months, but if that situation along like 3 or 4 years paying interest rate at 7%, 8%, 6%, you could convert a liquidity problem and in an insolvency problem, even for big economies like the Italian one. So in that sense, this could become insolvency problems too, with devastating consequences for the global economy. And that was the situation we started to face last year. It was necessary to take action, and this is where the G20 economies and international financial institutions had to come in. Now the second part, the G20 response. When Mexico assumed the G20 presidency, global perspectives were dire. The 2011 meeting in France concluded without clear commitments and without a sense of direction. I remember that we were there in Cannes, in this beautiful French place. And suddenly the meeting was stopped because some of the leaders were discussing with the leader of Greece either Greece will be inside the European Union or not, or the Eurozone. So it was a very rare, if I can say that, summit then. So it seems that the crisis was not only deep, but also out of control. So in this context, the Mexican presidency had to coordinate complex negotiations during the months prior to the Los Cabos summit this year. We urgently needed to strengthen the financial support mechanism for countries most affected for the crisis. And drafting the G20 agenda required several ministerial meetings to address problems and implement proper policy initiatives on issues that went beyond just the economic crisis. Some of these issues included trade liberalization, job creation, and financial inclusion. We tried to strike a balance between the urgent and the important, between the long run and the short run. This is how things stood as the summit in Los Cabos began. And there, we work in three areas. First, the countries proposed macroeconomic and structural policies to solve our short-term problems at global level. Second, the countries promoted policies to guarantee strong growth in the medium and long term. And third, we incorporated environmental sustainability and access to affordable basic goods as key policies in the long term. One of the most important outcomes of Los Cabos was that at a time when there was serious doubt about the euro's viability, all G20 members agreed to support measures that will strengthen European integration in areas such as fiscal policy, banking system, and regulatory frameworks. In other words, Los Cabos provided a clear sign that we all support one Europe with fiscal union, trade union, monetary union, and banking union. It was also crucial to boost demand without creating new debt problems in order to restore growth. The Eurozone has been following, more or less, this game plan. Just 3 days ago, as you know, the European Central Bank announced very significant measures to provide support to countries suffering from confidence problems and to make clear it will take every measure to keep the integrity of the Eurozone. Another important result was the Los Cabos Action Plan. It contains specific short-term measures to be implemented by all countries. The specific ideas from the Business 20 group, the B20, were also included. We needed to strengthen the global response to international financial crises in an interconnected world. To this end, we announced an increase in the resources available to the International Monetary Fund. We were expecting to raise almost $400 billion to IMF. And let me tell you that right there inside the meeting, inside the summit, we started to say, well, our friends of Brazil are putting $10 billion to the IMF, and we need to support this effort, and we will make equal effort to Brazil. And their friends of Colombia say, well, we have not enough money, but we will put $1 billion, and so on. And some countries that were reluctant to put money finally say, this is my offer. And finally we raised no 400 billion, but 450 billion supporting the IMF. And this is the largest injection ever in the history of this institution, with some very particular things. For instance, is the largest injection of money to IMF, and the first without the United States and Canada, for different reasons. The United States, because, of course, in the middle of the campaign and the political and legal restriction for President Obama, he was unable to do that, but he's supporting the Treasury through other means, the IMF. And Canada, well, I don't know exactly why, but they didn't cooperate. Unfortunately, to regain fiscal sustainability, we have to reduce fiscal deficit at a time of economic slowdown. But if this is done in a bold and credible way, negative impacts on aggregate demand could be minimized. In the case of external imbalances that still threaten global stability, we need countries to move towards more open markets and to place a greater emphasis on a stronger domestic demand. The other priorities of the G20 were, one, to maintain and strengthen our commitment to free trade. And probably this is the main message we need to emphasize. What the world needs in this particular moment to overcome this crisis is more trade, not less. More trade, not less, should be the rule for all the players. And I need to say that because there are a lot of temptations in several regions to re-establish protectionism, including some countries in Latin America. Therefore, we in Los Cabos extended our standstill commitment or the promise not to enact any protectionist measures until 2014. Two, to support the process of strengthening financial regulation and supervision, as well as the Financial Stability Board, because well-allocated credit is a very powerful instrument for development. Three, on food security, we agreed to increase public and private investment in agriculture, as well as to carry out actions to increase agricultural productivity. We can implement policies to reduce price volatility. Four, on sustainable development, we agreed to include green growth policy options within the G20 structural reform agenda. Green growth is a way to economic recovery. All of these actions are significant steps to reach our common objective of strong, sustainable, and balanced growth. And finally, the road ahead. It is clear that the global economy continues to face important challenges. However, the international economic outlook has improved a lot. The balance of risk has changed and has changed in our favor. 1 year ago, the G20 Cannes Summit was interrupted, as I said, several times to discuss the possibility of Greece leaving the Eurozone. That discussion is over, and Greece has problems still, but is not longer the most pressing issue. Countries with liquidity problems like Spain and Italy have implemented structural adjustments, and European and international institutions have taken critical measures, such as building a strong and credible firewall finally. The G20 summit in Los Cabos appears to have been a turning point in some sense. The long road to recovery is now clear, and with committed leadership, I'm confident that a new period of global growth could begin very soon. As for Mexico, thanks to the action taken during the recession, and thanks to the effort of our people through a very difficult exit strategy, our macroeconomic fundamentals are sound, and we have strengthened our competitiveness. We remain an economy committed to free trade, as we are convinced that this is the route to reassume growth. We are strengthening our position as privileged logistical platform for international trade with unprecedented investment in infrastructure. We have 44 free trade agreements, which give us access to more than 1 billion consumers and almost 2/3 of the world GDP. Exports are booming in Mexico, and we have gained competitiveness in several high-value sectors like the automotive sectors. For instance, when I took office in 2006, Mexico was the 9th largest exporter of vehicles in the world. And today, we are the 4th largest exporter of vehicles in the world, even surpassing the United States. Last week, I received a very important announcement, for instance, that Audi is going to establish a new facility in Mexico, its first in the whole America, which implies an investment of $1.3 billion. And in addition to that, we received the same news coming from Mazda, Honda, and I think Toyota is the other one. Oh, GM, but they are there by several years. Well, we are doing very well in automotive industry. Now, Mexico, for other data, which is quite interesting. Mexico is exporting more manufacturers than the rest of Latin American and Caribbean countries combined, including Brazil. We are exporting 60% of the total manufacturers of the region. And we have received in the last 5 years $125 billion in foreign direct investment. So Mexico will continue to be a loyal and committed ally in the effort to recover growth. And we are trying to diversify our relationship towards different regions and countries from the United States. Yes, we have a very strong relationship with the American market. Actually, we used to have 80% of our total export going to United States. Today we have 67%, which is high, but we are diversifying through free trade, or trade and investment. And in that sense, we are going to new projects. For instance, in Latin America, we are creating the Pacific Alliance between Mexico, Colombia, Peru, and Chile, and inviting another players. In that sense, now the Pacific Alliance has more economic growth, more exports, more trade than the Mercosur initiative. And second, and more important, we are going into TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And I want to express my gratitude to the people and government of Singapore, because Singapore is supporting a lot Mexico in this particular effort. We realize that the economic growth will be here in the Pacific zone, at least this decade and probably the next. So the prosperity for Mexican people will be through trade, and will be to trade with new partners like Singaporean economy, Singaporean friends, and new partners in this Pacific Sea. So we look forward to making business with all of our trading partners. That is one important reason for us to have come to this beautiful country, which is Singapore. Thank you very much.
Thank you, that was great. Mr. President, thank you very much for your excellent lecture in which you spoke about three dimensions of Mexico's perspective on the global economy, the global economic crisis, the measures adopted by the G20, and the way forward. We have approximately 10 or 15 minutes for questions, and I would now welcome those from the audience. And just a few things to say before we start the question and answers. Could those who wish to ask questions of President Calderón please give your name and your institutional affiliation, and please make your question as brief as possible, and please do stay in your seat and the microphone will come to you. If you could just indicate if you wish to ask a question by raising your hand. Adam.
Good morning. Stephanie Lay from Culiacán, Sinaloa, Credit Suisse. Mr. President, I think that it is very clear to all of us that your cabinet was responsible for the strategic positioning in terms of macroeconomics of Mexico. And my question to you is, how do you foresee that the next cabinet will take on your excellent doing? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you like to take more questions?
Yes, I saw one.
At the back there.
Thank you. Azulo Gazon from Mexico City, APEC Secretariat. Last week we saw an article on Financial Times talking about Mexico's exports reaching levels of China exports. And they basically said that the main reason was because of the low cost in salaries. So when are we really going to promote an export policy that goes away from cheap manufacturing and will leap into innovative and more advanced manufacture? Thank you.
Thank you. And one more question in this batch. Sir, in the middle there.
Good morning, Octavio Gomez from Veracruz, capital of Shore and Marine.
A lot of Mexican people here.
Yes. Recently you made an announcement with regards to new discoveries on deep waters in the Gulf of Mexico. So I would like to know what are like the next steps forward for Mexico to tackle this.
Okay, thank you very much. 3 questions.
Yes. Well, let me start with the second one in the sense that, well, indeed, it's true that Mexican exports are growing in a very amazing way. The rates of double-digit by several years. Of course, that implies a lot of jobs for Mexican people. But let me disagree in the sense that is due the labor cost in Mexico. Because in that sense, the gap between labor costs in Mexico and the labor costs in China or India and other countries is clearly cheaper costs is strictly in salaries is there. On top of that, talking only about labor market, as you know, we have in Mexico unions, very powerful unions, and a lot of free contracts, if I can say that, with those unions in a free environment to bargain and negotiate those. But the reasons and what is interesting is to explore what exactly Mexican competitiveness increase. I don't know if it's some of my friends here in the Mexican delegation has. Do you have my slides, Damian? Please, you help me with the competitiveness index. But meanwhile, let me tell you that Mexican competitiveness increase, not due to salaries. Actually, salaries in export industries are above 60% or 50% above the rest of the economy. What Mexico is improving its competitiveness is due to several factors. One is infrastructure. For instance, we have built in 6 years built or rebuilt more than 20,000 kilometers of roads or highways. How much is that? It's the distance between North Pole and South Pole. And with that, a lot of companies are preferring Mexico. Second is the geographical privileged position we have. Of course, it's not due my government, but but we need to get an advantage of that, because we have 3,000 kilometers of border with the largest economy in the world. And let me quote one of my classmates in Kennedy School coming from Singapore, that we were saying a very popular expression in Mexico coined by President 1 century ago that used to say, "Poor Mexico, so close to the United States and too far from God." And some of my colleagues told me, well, we will do anything in order to have not 3,000 kilometers, but also 300 meters of border with the United States. Well, that's the second question about our competitiveness, because a lot of companies are coming to invest in Mexico, coming back from China to Mexico. Third is the investment in human capital or human value, as I do prefer to say, because these 130,000 new engineers every year are providing a marvelous asset for companies. And it is not only a manufacturing process. If I can say, we are trying to provide talent factoring process in Mexico. And let me give you one example. Today, we are not only assembling computers. Mexican engineers are providing one of the most successful software industry in the world, growing and growing. Companies building the software for several global companies in the world. And other Mexican engineers today in Querétaro, we founded a new university, Aerospace University. And around that, we try to promote new aerospace companies. And the outcome is that today, Mexico is the country which has attracted more aerospace companies in the world in the last 4 years. And there are a group of Mexican engineers designing the new engine for Airbus 380, the biggest airplane in the world. Mexican engineers. So it's not only cheap salaries. Well, talking about the second, the oil. Well, we had a very important discovery the last couple of months, in the sense that when I took office, the rate of substitution of proven reserves was like 40%. In that sense, per each new barrel in proven reserves, that very same day, we have sold 2 barrels. And it was a very unstable situation for a Mexican company. Now, we are investing a lot. Well, I know that you are seeing the figures. Well, I'm sorry, but it's very distracting, so I need to talk about that. Well, that is the rate of restitution of proven reserves. We are reaching more than 100% this year. And in that sense, we are investing a lot in the Gulf of Mexico. In particular, we are drilling in the so-called deep waters. And 2 months ago, our Mexican drilling platform, we are acquiring the services of 4 deep water drilling platforms. One of them, by the way, is Singaporean deep water platform. And one of them founded a new oil field. And according with the research we are doing, that new field could imply, if those discovery is confirmed as a proven reserves, could imply a new proven reserve at 10 billion barrels, which means to twice all proven reserves in Mexico. That is the size of the potential discovered in deep water. And when I talk about deep water, I'm talking about the depth of the sea there is probably 2.5 kilometers, and the field is probably 3 kilometers below the bottom of the sea. Well, that is the potential. But, in my opinion, it is absolutely necessary to modernize Pemex even more. And it's absolutely necessary to change the legal framework in order to allow Pemex to make, for instance, joint ventures with global companies and specialized companies. We need to learn from the experience of Petrobras in Brazil. President Cardoso made the most important change in legal framework probably in Latin America, changing the situation of Petrobras at the end of the 90s. And with that, Brazil started a new era as oil producer. Brazil was producing at the end of the 90s like 900,000 barrels a day, and today is producing equal to Mexico, 2.5 million barrels a day with that reform. And in that sense, Pemex could produce much better and much more oil and natural gas if Pemex allowed to participate in joint ventures either downstream or in some very particular and complex projects upstream. So that is my opinion, and I think that the next government could consider that. Actually, I have listened the new president talking about that in several fora. So I hope that Mexico will continue its pace in order to be such a strong oil producer. And finally, going to the first question, and a very good one, what is going to do next cabinet? I think that it could be a good question for the next cabinet. at the next government. But I hope that the tremendous effort we have made these years could be continued in next government. I think that the name of the game in this year has been transformation. Transformation of the economy towards competitiveness, transformation of social aspects towards equal opportunities in terms of health and education, and even in the other field that it was mentioned before, insecurity issues. Let me clarify that the violence in Mexico is not due to the action of the government. The violence is due to the action of the criminals. And the criminals started in the last decade, not only in Mexico, but also in several Latin American countries, a new way to do their action and activities. By tradition, criminals linked with drugs and organized crime used to export, if I can use the expression, only export drugs towards the United States, which is actually the largest consumer of drugs in the world. That is our problem. But they started to try to allocate their drugs in the local markets. And with that, they changed their activities. Instead to look only for point of transfer towards the United States, they started to try to control territories and cities in Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras, Colombia, Venezuela, and several countries. And what happened with that? It's a problem of, how can I say that, differential calculus. It's a change of dimension. With the traditional business, they were looking only to control a line and a point in the border. But with the new business, they are trying to control the whole territory. It's a new dimension. It's a surface. It's not a line. And with that, they started to fight each other, trying to control the territory, and that is the origin of the violence. And then the intervention of the government is to recover the authority of the state over those territories. So in that sense, the violence is not generated by the government's action. It's the other way around. The violence generated the intervention of the government. And our strategy is in three fields. One is to fight criminals, and we are doing so in a very bold manner. Second, and more important, is to build and rebuild law enforcement institutions. In particular, we are building new police corps and new attorney general offices in the country. And third, and even more important, we are trying to rebuild social fabric in Mexico through new opportunities for education, jobs, preventing addictions, and so on. And that is, the strategy is a long-term one, and it is difficult, but is needed to do. Now, I hope that the new government could take the best part of any of this effort of transformation and could continue the effort in order to see in the future a better Mexico. What I'm seeing for the future of Mexico. If we keep on track of this comprehensive effort in several fields, I could see clearly that in the future, Mexico will be a very competitive economy. Actually, it is already a very competitive economy in manufacturing. It will be more equal and justice country, and that will be the outcome of a very important goal we reach in this administration, which is universal health coverage, which means doctor, medicine, treatment, and hospital for any Mexican who needs it. And probably it's difficult to understand such kind of effort in a country with a level of life outcome of long decades of effort like Singapur. But a country like Mexico implies that we, in 10 years, we have made affordable social and health services more affordable, or affordable for more than half of the population in Mexico. We made affordable health services for more people than the previous century in the country. With that, Mexico will be a more equal country in next decades. And even in security issues, what is the name of the transformation? When I took office, what I saw is two processes. One is the awakening process of law enforcement institutions due to corruption and vulnerability. And in that point, organized crime, and that was the other process, was growing. So this simultaneous process, vulnerability and weakening of the law enforcement institution, plus the strengthening of the organized crime, was threatening the future of Mexico. And what we are seeing today clearly, of course we have a lot of challenges, but we are seeing a process of improving the capabilities and reliability of law enforcement institutions, and at the same time we are seeing a process of weakening of the organized crime. So we are defeating, we are debilitando, how do you say that? Weakening. We are weakening the organized crime. And that process will be, will provide a better future to Mexico in legal terms, in law enforcement terms, in rule of law issues, which is exactly our purposes.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're rather running out of time.
I promise to be very short in my answers. If you want to follow one or two more.
Do you have time to answer one or two more?
Let me say yes. I don't know, but
okay. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Do you have one or two more questions, sir? At the back on the left.
Thanks. I'm Kevin Lim from Reuters. Mr. President, you have several months left in office. So the question is, what do you hope to achieve during these last few months? And you have also labor reforms that are kind of under discussion. Are you confident of getting this passed before you leave office, and under what kind of conditions or compromises? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And one more brief question. Sir, at the back there.
Midoni Ramos, from Tula Hidalgo. Owens Corning is the company I work for. I got a question for you, Mr. President. What, in one word, what would you describe would be your legacy as a president? What would be your legacy to the Mexicans and to the world?
Thank you very much.
Talking about labor reform, yes, I propose to the Congress legal reform in labor issues. Why? Because I'm sure that Mexico, in order to complete this transformation towards more competitive economy, needs to provide flexibility to labor markets. We are having probably more than 1 million young people arriving every year to a labor age, and they have not enough opportunities to work. And we need to change the law in order to allow young people and women to work in the most favorable conditions which is possible. And that is possible, and if we can get labor reform, Mexico will be even more competitive. And we will get even more economic rate of growth, and that is the goal of that. So the name of the game for me behind the labor reform is more jobs for Mexican people, especially for youth and women. I don't know if I will get a positive answer coming from the Congress, but I hope if the Congress keep the law, I will get at least one answer, because there is a reform in political terms in which preferential initiative could be solved at least in 1 month in the Congress. And I have this opportunity to present a preferred initiative, and I did that with 2 initiatives. One is labor, and I hope an answer in 1 month in the Congress. And the other one is transparency. What I am proposing to the Congress is that any public cent, any public tax revenue could be tracked for the people since the very beginning to the very end. That is possible today at federal level because we are supporting transparency at federal level, but that is not possible, not yet at local level, local authorities. And I'm proposing a full transparency in public finances at any level of the government. And the second one is difficult to say. Probably the most important in social terms is health, is universal health coverage. That could be the most important part of the legacy in social terms. But as I was mentioning, my purpose was to transform Mexico, and the word is transformation. To transform the law enforcement institutions, to transform the social opportunities through health and education, and to transform economy towards competitiveness. I know that it is difficult with the problems that we have had in terms of crime, due to this change in the performance of the criminal activities, and the problems we have faced in terms of the world's economic crisis for living generations. It is difficult to see today the tremendous effort we have done. However, I'm very sure that in the future, Mexico will be much better, will be safer, will be more equal, and will be more prosperous. And by the way, it will be cleaner than today, because we made a very important effort in environmental issues that I didn't mention. With that, I think that the duty of my generation, and in particular the main obligation of my government, was to realize how important was to start this transformation process in Mexico in this particular moment. As I used to say, if always I consider a privilege the public service, to service Mexico in such difficult time has been a double privilege for me, and I'm very sure for my team.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Mr. President, for answering those questions so fully and so frankly. I'm afraid I must now bring this Sixth Fullerton lecture to a close. But before doing that, I must thank President Calderón for finding the time in his very busy schedule for this lecture this morning and for engaging with the audience here at the Fullerton Hotel. You have cast much light, sir, on how Mexico has responded to the challenges posed by economic crisis, how Mexico has used its role in the G20 creatively and effectively, and how your country's economic policies are looking to the future. You've also talked much more broadly, particularly about internal security issues and the rule of law in your country, which are obviously crucially important for Mexico's future. So thank you again, Mr. President, for speaking here this morning and giving this audience in Singapore a rare opportunity to hear a Mexican perspective on these extremely important issues. Thank you again, sir.